Okay, right. Hello, everyone. So this is me starting another one of our kind of alternate sessions. It might not be capped at 15 minutes. So the theme of today is going to be quite different in the sense that it's going to be super controversial. I'm going to be talking about sort of bias in AI, particularly around recruiting. And I'm actually going to show an example. So I'm going to show how easy it is by actually building a racist, sexist AI recruitment bot and show you how easy that is to do. And then we're going to then just talk about the consequences of that. But first, I'm going to introduce our sort of new guest. So do you want to give it a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Mencey. My background is I'm a software salesman, particularly in the application security space. And I think this subject resonates to me because, well, to be honest, quite naturally, I've always been curious about how social biases will translate into technology in the future, and will technology really be the solution to minimizing that in every industry? And it's something that brought up my curiosity in this area, and that was a headline that I saw back in 2018, which highlighted the fact that UCAS, which is the body that most students use to actually get into universities, apparently they had some fraud screening software, and more than 52% of the applications that were flagged up as possibly fraudulent between 2013 and 2017 were from Black students. And when you're talking more than 50%, it's pretty much an obvious thing, right? So even UCAS actually admitted to the fact that it's very suspicious. And obviously, Adam, you've highlighted this now that it's possible to build a machine learning piece of software that actually can be biased. So I'm very curious to see how that translates, and I guess this might be an example of how that can happen in real life, right?
Yeah, so there's something. Let's just dig a little bit deeper in this, right? First, so you mentioned that there was a kind of a bias, but what does that mean? Like, what does it mean that the UCAS? So was it like 50% of applications were not real, or what do you think that infers? What do you think they're actually saying?
So from what I've read, although it is the media, so I'm guessing you have to take it with a pinch of salt, but it's not coming directly from UCAS. But I guess what the suspicion is just it's questioning whether the students' credentials and what they've actually submitted to UCAS is actually legitimate. So whether they have been predicted the grades that they say they've been predicted,
Okay.
looking at that type of stuff. So obviously, once they use the screening software, then it flags it up as suspicious, and then they do their manual checks.
The recruitment software is quite similar. I'm going to go to speaker view. The way that sort of works is depending on which company. So very big enterprises find that they just don't have enough time to screen CVs, and so the way that they do it is they would sort of pay a third party company who might have an advanced specialized recruitment software, which is essentially a CV screening algorithm or model solution, and it will then pick the staff based upon what it thinks is optimal. But generally, there's another layer to this, right, which is what people aren't aware of. So it's not just they look at your CV. Most of these recruitment software, right, they're quite sophisticated, and they'll look at the history of recruiting. So they'll say, you've recruited 20 people from Leeds, and you've only recruited one person from Dundee. So the model predicts you're going to continue to employ people from Leeds. So, and that's just what I'm going to show. The way we'll do it is I'm going to show you the recruitment bias AI. I'm not just going to show you, I'm actually going to build it from scratch. And then I'll show you an example of a negative bias and then a positive bias. And then we'll talk about, is it actually the AI that's doing that? But before we kick off, I just want to quickly touch on this for those who aren't aware. So in AI and data science, one of the most hottest topics at the moment is this thing called protected characteristics. And so depending on who you ask and which government, and there's a certain number. Some governments mandate it as law, but actually it's very low. I don't think the UK does it. It's advisory only. So technically your AI could be biased towards, say, sex, race, disability, age, and that'll be legal. So at the moment, it's a non-binding framework. Some countries it is binding, but most it isn't. But this is what you'll expect to see in the future. So this is like, if you are a guy, if you're a PM or a developer and you're working on a project to use AI, then you kind of have to tick these boxes or hit these critical milestones if you're going to build a high quality and future compliant AI. So we'll touch more on that. But Mencey, feel free to just jump in, and as we go along. This is quite controversial.
Just to summarize, we're basically building a discriminant bot.
Yeah. Well, what we're doing is we're building. Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, we're building we're building an AI that's to recruit, but it's super flawed, right? So what we're saying is, I'm going to build something which is on the market. I've seen things like this on the market. Mine is a much more simplified version,
right?
But same engine, same underlying principle. And what I'm showing is the current software that's out now. I'm just going to show how easy it is to be discriminating. So let's kind of get started, see if this works. For those, don't worry if you're seeing code. I'm just going to navigate to a project and I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it bias bot, or that'll be fine. Now, this is what coders pretty much always do, right? So what coders do is they don't build something from scratch. They build stuff from previous code, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So earlier, a while back, earlier in the year, I did something in Kaggle. So there was one of the most famous Kaggle projects. It's like a AI ML competition. Is this Titanic code, and all it does is it just predicts who would die. So you take all the passengers from the Titanic and you split them in half. You train it on one half and you say, for this other half, do you predict if they would survive or not? So, like men, women, first class, second class, children, all of that sort of stuff was part of the study. It's a very simple model. We're just going to use the same one again for simplicity.
What type of information did you have to predict? Did it have like financial background, all of that type of stuff?
Let's just drill into it, right? So this is just CSVs. It's just a CSV file. So that's we don't need this test one. So we'll get rid of this test one and we'll get rid of this, right? So what we're going to do is we'll open it up and then we're just going to model it for our purposes. So you can see that these are the fields that they've got, right? So there's a number of the passenger ID number, and then the survived 0 or 1. So if they survived, it was a 1, and if they died, it was a 0. And just quickly looking, you can see that okay. So I need to lean in a bit, but you can see like this guy, he was passenger class 1 and he survived, and this was passenger class 3 and didn't survive, right? So there might be a trend there, and then we've got sex, age, blah blah blah. But we're going to greatly simplify the process, right? Okay, cool. We're going to just delete that, and we're going to change this to something like, we'll call it candidate ID, and we'll say this is were they hired, right? So were they hired, and then we're going to say gender. So we'll start off simple, and what we're going to do is so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a history of, we'll just make this up completely. So we'll say this guy is a male, and then we're going to say that they were hired, and then we're going to say that candidate number 1, right? So what we'll do is we'll do about, say, 30 of them. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just show overwhelming bias, right? So we're going to say for the males, they mostly get hired, right? So we'll go for the males. We'll say this guy gets hired. This one doesn't get hired, doesn't get hired, hired, right? And then for the females, we're going to do the inverse relationship, right? So we're going to say most of them don't get hired, which isn't fair, or maybe fair, we don't know. But this is the pattern, right? So what we're saying is, if you kind of guess where I'm going here, is we're saying AI isn't exactly making the decision. It's it's amplifying the racial or sexual or gender or whatever bias is in the company. It's amplifying it and predicting based upon the company's history. So, you know, if we look at this, we can say, you know, most of these candidates, males, seem to get employed. Most of the females seem not to get employed. So we'll leave it at that. And so that's our, you can think of that as our training data, right? So let me
Just a
jump back.
question as well, Adam, just for the non-technical
Yeah,
listeners.
yeah, please, by all means, that's good.
Kaggle,
Yeah,
is Kaggle a framework or a language or a
it's
library?
it, it's a website. So Kaggle, you
Well,
can think of Kaggle as like, yeah, it's a good question though, because most people don't know. So Kaggle is just a competition site. So what you do is there'll be companies who want, like, say this Facebook, for example, they'll say, we need to detect hate speech in memes. And they'll say, you know, they'll say like, £100,000 prize for those who can build the model. So people will flock on and have all the information, and people just go away and work at and try and build the model.
so it's almost like a
And
bounty for software developers, and they could just.
exactly, that's exactly what it is. It's essentially a bounty. So what we're going to do is we're gonna delete this column because we don't know if they're hired or not. And to make it more easier, I'm just going to show, you know, I should make sure my caps locks are on. Hopefully so what we're going to do is we're just going to make half of them male and half of them female. The program is then going to predict if they get hired or not, right? So we could shuffle this about, you know, maybe we'll just put a couple in. We'll shuffle it about just to make sure it's not, again, not too easy for it. And so what we would expect to see in this biased AI is that most of the males will have a 1 and most of the females will have a 0. So that's pretty much it.
So whilst you're doing that,
Yeah.
so you created this project in the past. So all of this is available on GitHub, or is it that you scrapped something else and kind of made it your own? How does it work? How do people usually like do this?
Yeah, well, so exactly. So the people who do Kaggle might not put their code on GitHub, depending on if they want to show it or not. Sometimes the whole point is you don't show your solution, right? You just show your model. But the code, you know, the code, some people do choose to put the code on GitHub. Here's the code, right? So just to bear in mind. So here's the code. So yeah, so here's my data. Here's this the code I'm about to run. So essentially, this one is for people, train is for the people who've already interviewed in the past, and test is what we're going to predict, or the AI is going to associate a grade based upon the history. So okay, nothing special about that. So that should work. We're going to point to a data file. So again, should be fine. And then we're going to read this. So what's happening here is we're importing libraries that we need to make this work. We're pointing to the data path and the data file, and then we're specifying the two files as these two variables that we're going to read in. So it worked fine. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to amend the example to fit our case. Those that survived would be under the hired category. So rather than, did they survive the Titanic, it's where they hired. We're only going to base it on one feature at the moment. So we're just going to do on gender, and then we're going to remove all of these other parts. Right, and so this is fine. So this is just going to take the test data and the training data and produce the model. So it's a very simple random forest classifier. But the point I want to get across here is I could change that to something a lot more complex, like a RGBM, even some neural networks, any form of sophisticated algorithm, right? But the underlying process is still the same, right? It's using data to predict or produce a score. So the output, obviously, passenger ID is candidate ID, and that will be the name of the variable. And we want to say, did they get hired? So that would be survived. So let's just run the model and see what happens. For comparison, so these are the people we wanted to predict, right? So these are the people we don't know if they've not sat the interview and they've not yet been screened. And now we're going to say, this is what the AI has decided. We'll put them side by side, but essentially what we're saying is, males are getting hired, but we can see this female is not hired. Female's not hired, not hired, not hired, right? So what it's done is maybe one or two get hired, but you see all of the males have been hired, right? So what's happened is, this is new data, right? So this is in, the training data is the historical, did they get hired or not? This is now predicting based upon, the history of the company. And what it's saying is the history of the company is quite sexist. Like, what's your thoughts on how do we stop this? Like, is this an issue? So let's just say that work. Do you think this is really a big an issue as data scientists are making
this is
it?
a big issue. In fact, it's very relevant right now. So I've got to be a bit of a bee in my bonnet about all of these kind of screenings, because even without the software, let's go back to the UCAS situation, it's all quite flawed, right? In terms of when I was applying for uni, because basically you get your results after you finish college, right? So you'll do the official exams, but you're going to get the results after college. And historically, I just haven't. I've always kind of fallen out of favor with teachers and stuff like that. I don't know if I had a problem with authority when I was young, but I was habitually basically for the predicted grades that the UCAS use, because you get the official grades after you finish college. It turns out that universities have to rely on teachers' opinions. So they'll give you predicted grades, and it's those predicted grades that actually are used for the decision-making process as to whether you get into a university or not. There's cover letters and all this type of other stuff, but really that's the cusp of it, right? And I didn't really have strong relationships with my teachers, so I was always habitually like under predicted when it came to my grades. I would be predicted C's when I actually came out with A's. I was very talkative in school, so I always thought that having software in place that could actually help mitigate that bias would be so important. But then to learn that actually there's other sorts of biases that are still being translated into the system, it really, I think it's quite dangerous, especially in a period like right now, where due to coronavirus, there's going to be a lot of students that are going to be relying on this type of screening and those predicted grades, because they're not actually going to be able to do the exams properly. I mean, I've heard quite a lot of GCSE grades being issued now. Again, you can correct me, or anyone in this forum in the comment section can actually confirm this or not. But I've been hearing that actually a lot of it's going to be relying on predicted grades, and I know there's going to be a lot of reliance on this actual screening process too. And I worry that certain groups within our communities are going to actually suffer due to a combination of both human bias and automation, or problem in the automated screening processes as well. So Adam, I think this is more relevant than you think it is.
Going back to our agenda, right? So this is an example of negative bias. So now we're going to go and jump into positive bias. Again, guys, I do apologize if this is like super monotonous. It's just worth it for me to just drill through, right? So it's just, it is necessary. It's a necessary evil to look into, to show the actual underlying mechanisms, because not everybody's a data scientist, not everybody's a developer. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to say, we'll say something like disability, right? We are going to say that any of the females that have a disability, we're gonna employ them. So we're going to say there's some dodgy, there's some dodgy policy going on, and that's not, again, this is not me. I'm not saying anything of my subconscious. What I'm trying to do is highlight on things which is popular in the discourse about bias, right? So I'm highlighting a popular known bias, right? So we'll take a couple of people and we're going to put that bias in. So what we're saying is, in the history, people, who who identified with a disability, they were more likely to get hired regardless if they were male or female. That's essentially what I'm going to kind of try and show. You know, we'll keep this easy. So I'm going to just say everybody's a no for most. But the ones at the bottom, I'm going to say yes, yes, and yes for the male. So what we would expect is we would expect hired for this male, hired for this female, hired for this female, but not hired for the rest. Nothing really changes in the code other than we're going to add that extra feature. You have to kind of get it exactly right though. So I need to make sure I get the spelling exactly right, even if there's like a capital letter at the beginning, it could throw it off. Okay, so let's just run this again. We're going to line it up. So number 30 lines up to number 30. And we can see that the two that identified with some form of disability did indeed get hired. And additionally to the male that we identified. And the rest of the data remains mostly consistent, right? So it's like still disadvantage. So in this case, it's disadvantaging females, but potentially advantaging people with a disability. In fact, actually, that is exactly what it's doing, right? So the AI is making that decision based upon this historical data. So again, this is people that have not yet completed their application. And this is what the AI has decided. So the AI has made the decision to say, okay, you two get the job because you tick this box, but you don't get the job because you don't tick any boxes that are preferential. Now, I'm going to just sort of wrap this up to be clear, right? So this code might look intimidating for some, but essentially the key thing is we're applying this thing called a random forest classifier. So it's a very basic statistical method for dealing with selection. And I could change this, right? So I could change this classifier to use, say, something a little bit more sophisticated, such as an XGB boost, or I could use a neural network to manage this, but the results would be the same because this data sample that we've used is pretty sparse, right? So even if this data sample was bigger, if that inherent bias was there, we would still be falling down that path. Do you feel right now we need a human in the loop? Like, so for example, do you feel like my opinion is I do lots of interviews for candidates, and for me, I have to admit a lot of it is on feeling as well, right? So it's like, do I resonate with this person? There are things that I can't articulate on paper or on an Excel spreadsheet that actually makes a difference in the office. So the first question is, do you think that's real? Do you think that's the way that we see? Is that the way you would imagine recruitment to occur and generally
Absolutely.
decision
Absolutely.
making?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people gravitate towards what they're familiar with. You know, if you have a feel for someone, if someone reminds you of someone in your past, etc., you're just gonna, that whole gut feeling thing is very real, right? And I think we need software to counteract that. But then we also need the human as well to counteract the rigidity of the software too. So I mean, I know you talk about, I know machine learning is really about, well, I mean, machine learning is a positive thing. And I mean, it goes into the whole ethics debate, but I think we need both to coincide. And, and I think both need to counteract that biases together.
The code that I showed you, 2 CSV files and 1 model. Okay, pretty simple. But that's what most of these recruitment packages will be like. These recruitment automation packages will be something like that, more complex. And they'll probably build from something really simple like that and add pieces on, right? So they'll add more features to consider, age, height, employment activity, gap in employment history. So maybe, for example, maybe employers are really averse to people that have a 2-year gap, and the AI will look at the history and say, oh, everybody that's had a 2-year gap did not get employed. Therefore, I'm going to follow that bias. And so this is the sort of problem that we have today. again, protected characteristics are not mandated by law with regards to production of AI software. It's a grey area. So I'll take the UK, whereas all evidence that I've seen is it's mostly advisory, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you've got no protection, right? Because if you can prove it and you say, well, I was really good, but I've been disadvantaged, you can go to court and you can win, but you shouldn't have to go to court, right? So we shouldn't have to send everybody that's been disadvantaged to court. And that's the main issue that's kind of driving this, right? Is, you want to be proactive rather than reactive. Because you being so tight in the software space, right? And you're seeing things which most developers and DevOps engineers won't see for 5 years, and even AI engineers. I mean, you're working with the companies that are on the bleeding edge. So my question to you is, like, your personal feeling in the next 5 to 10 years, is that going to be resolved, or do you think we're just going to need?
Absolutely not. I think we've got to learn about the problem a bit more. We're behind in actually understanding what constitutes those biases in the first place from a social perspective. And unless we can build a machine that can do that learning alongside us and get there first to then teach us. So yeah, I mean, we got to get going on that. I don't even know what it's called. I've read this a couple of times. I'm still trying to understand which is it. It's not seed AI, is it? Probably seed AI or
AGI, I think maybe.
Yeah, we need to just replicate a better human mind to figure the social aspects of the biases first, and then teach us to do it, and then we can build on that. But we just don't know enough about the roots of biases. We're just starting to really touch the is it the tip of the iceberg or the base? So I don't know.
Yeah. You'll do is I think I'll summarize from once you go, but I think kind of the points that you quickly made is essentially we have this problem where we need more grounded knowledge to actually understand the problem before we can automate it. I'm going to recap on what the ways to resolve this is, right? So the first way is you need to be more diverse in your data selection. Second way is training your AI based on your history might not necessarily be the best thing, because your history might be rubbish, right? So you might have a really biased, corrupt process, and so the AI is only going to take that and accelerate it. Third point, we need to start thinking about interpretability of AI. So like, what does that mean? How can we explain it to business? How can we explain it to management? The onus there is on the developers like me, data science engineers, and anybody who's technical. Fourth point, the public needs to be engaged, right? So I'm not talking about a few TED Talks from Steven Pinker, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg. That's the worst thing possible. It needs to be more lower level. It needs to be like engaging people in a way that they can understand and not flaunting a product, right? It needs to be in a way that they really understand the consequences of what's happening, and they kind of get a say in this, because Andrew Yang's who was running for president, his strong point was maybe there should be a tariff or a tax, right? So these, every Amazon transaction, every Uber mile, every company that has benefited unnaturally from these algorithms should be paying something back in a value-added tax. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but there should be that engagement, right? Because this siphoning and optimization of the public can be a really good thing, but additionally, there may be responsibilities that need to be paid back to the public in kind. So is that universal basic income? Is it a tax? Or is it just a decision in whether the AI processes your journey or not? Who knows? Final part is the long-term feasibility of purpose, right? So when we kind of talk about UBI, universal basic income, AI, automation, what we're really talking about is purpose, right? So this is my opinion, and a bit of psychology behind this, is that a lot of people would be fine taking an average salary, working less hours, or being completely automated if they can put, if they have a roof over their heads. But psychology and sociology shows that generally societies stagnate really quickly if the people don't have something to do. Right now, maybe they will, maybe they can move into more artistic pursuits, but we can't guarantee that. So moving forward, we kind of need to think more about how we maintain purpose. So like, so do we roll out these products? Is there a way we can say, right, we're going to stop rolling out these products if they actually negatively impact the purpose and vision of people in our country? That might be a solution, probably overly draconian. What might be a better way to do it is to work on mechanisms how we can maintain purpose. Because if you don't have a purpose, like what's the point in getting up in the morning? If your job's no longer existing and you don't want to train up in tech, or you just don't think that you're capable, then what, you're going to stay at home and watch game shows every day? It's unlikely. It's going to be very bad for your health, right? So we need to think of ways that we can preserve purpose for those who are impacted. Okay, that's quite heavy. There's a lot of ranting from me, and there's a lot of fiddling about, but hopefully I've been able to sort of drive this sort of idea home. I've shown you practically how it works. Mencey's been able to kind of highlight this underlying need for more knowledge of the cultural and social norms which actually impact decisioning, which the AI then optimizes. So that's where we are. I'm going to wrap it up there. I do thank you all for sort of listening and hanging on. Comments in the section. These talks will improve as time progresses because I'm going to get more money and spend it on like effects and visuals to keep you busy. Yeah, we'll pick it up on the next time.